We are into the final weeks of the US election. The bit before polling day, anyway. America being what it is, well, it could end up being weeks before we actually know what the result of the election is after polling day. Some commentators are saying that if Donald Trump wins and the polls, let's face it, remain on a knife edge, that will end the period of normal politics. Often that's contextualised based on whoever's talking. So, for example, the Financial Times this week carried a piece saying a Trump victory would end normal politics between the UK and the US. That was an argument that was attached to the somewhat artificial row that the Trump campaign had kicked up over the UK Labour Party activists going to America to campaign for his opponent, Kamala Harris. For all the British media obsessed about it for several days, wasn't remotely an interesting story. But the fact is that yes, if Trump wins, Keir Starmer has a significant problem. Not because some of these activists are doing what they have done for countless past elections, not even because his Foreign Secretary David Lammy is on record as having said mean things about Trump in the past, although that will make things a little more difficult and personal, but more because Trump is a symptom of the shifting of the world order now from the rules-based order that the Brits and other Europeans support and which America helped to build, back to a might makes right world, which rewards those with power to break the rules as and when it suits them. Trump is, amongst other things, a transactional politician. And the brutal truth is that Keir Starmer, and Britain more generally, doesn't have that much that he wants or needs. Not only that, but Trump is fully aware that Britain needs the special relationship with America far more than the reverse, so he knows he can casually exploit the power imbalance for his benefit and maybe even entertainment, and Keir Starmer's discomfort. Keir Starmer should be getting used to that discomfort, though. This week he travelled a long and arduous path to attend the biannual Heads of the Commonwealth Summit. However, some of the most important other heads of Commonwealth countries were not in attendance. Narendra Modi of India, Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, they chose instead to go to Russia, where Vladimir Putin has been hosting the BRICS summit. You could not get a starker illustration of how the centres of power are shifting across the world. What's the point now of the Commonwealth, you might ask yourself? Apparently, as a forum for a number of former British colonies to demand massive payments from Britain as reparations for its part in the historical slave trade. A call which Keir Starmer, soon to unveil something of an austerity budget back at home, will have no hesitation or indeed much choice in rejecting, but it will be an embarrassment to him nonetheless. The real action, though, is now between the West, and whatever's going to happen to that with a second Trump term, and the growing bloc of emergent countries who reject the West's role and demand a new world order where they take their place. And that is coalescing around the BRICS organisation. At least that's what some of the key power brokers hope. It's a hope that will have been strengthened by the news this week that the International Monetary Fund has released updated predictions for the global economy, in which they revised downwards expected economic growth from the United States, from Germany and Japan, and revised upwards the contribution of key BRICS members, China, India, Russia and Brazil. At this summit, President Putin proclaimed the start of a new world order, as he planned to more than double the size of the BRICS bloc, with various countries wanting to align themselves with it, bringing Xi Jinping of China, as well as the leaders of Iran, Egypt, the UAE, Ethiopia and Egypt, in addition to the aforementioned India and South Africa, all of them coming to Russia. That helped Putin to send a message to the world that attempts to make him a pariah in the eyes of that world have not been successful. also arguably supported by the attendance of the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, who defended his attendance by pointing out that the BRICS now represents half the world's population. This, Putin would like to suggest, means that Russia's war against Ukraine has become accepted as a new normal in this world order. Now, that didn't entirely go his way, with various leaders at the summit calling for an end to the war, or at least no escalation, bearing in mind that the idea of North Korean troops fighting in Ukraine, as seems likely like right now, is viewed by many as the sort of escalation that could extend it, becoming a wider conflict, even a world war. And this gets to an underlying weakness right now with the BRICS coalition. For all that its leaders are largely united in their criticism of the West, there's actually rather a lot of important geopolitical questions that they remain utterly divided on. China and India, the two largest nations of people in the world, for example, they disagree on almost everything. And they're not the only ones. Nevertheless, Putin has cause to be well pleased this week, having hosted a summit so powerful, so full of people who at least have that hostility to the West now as a common meeting point. Which is one reason why breaking the dominance of the US dollar was one of the key points for discussion. Russia's vulnerability to sanctions has been largely facilitated by the role of the US dollar as the de facto global currency. Other countries see themselves as likewise having a keen interest to make themselves less vulnerable to an America that, for example under Trump, would be expected to be more unpredictable and more self-interested. And this is the point. It is now highly likely that the momentum shift in world power away from America to the discomfort of those who have historically been its allies is set to accelerate, thanks to Trump. If Trump actually wins the coming election, and assuming he does at least some of the things he's talked about doing, we will see a more isolationist America, slapping tariffs on all its international trade partners, aggressively against certain targets such as China. One might argue that his transactional approach will make NATO dysfunctional, since it will be no longer possible to rely on any defence guarantee that America has made as part of the pact. But the truth is that the Europeans have largely come to that conclusion anyway, regardless of who wins the next election. The fact is that Trump has this highly isolationist worldview. He has zero apparent interest in loyalty to allies, since they're all weaker than the US, so exist only to be bullied by him. He is an admirer of, and an intended practitioner of, the might makes right new world order that China and Russia expect to bring about. He thinks that will be a good thing because he presumes America will stay on top of the pile, and his leadership, he thinks, will help it to remain so. With all of that in plain sight, it is still highly likely that half the population of the United States is happy to vote for him. So whether he wins or loses this specific election, that is being taken by Europeans generally as a sign that America has become unstable and unreliable. Its promises may not be kept. Its perceptions of its interests may vary wildly from one election to the next. And its own democracy is unstable, with a polarised society closer to civil conflict than has been seen for a century, and who knows what the consequences of that may be. So yes, Macron's call for a strengthened independent European defence measure is increasingly being mainstreamed. And we saw this week an agreement between Britain and Germany on defence and security specifically, with the countries looking to work together to develop drones and a new long-range missile. Such moves are now going on. Again, regardless who wins the US election, they're going to continue going on, because whatever happens, America has de facto become unpredictable in the perspective of its allies. They used to see themselves as united by common values in democracy, common values in a rules-based order. For all that America didn't always live up to those values, as I guess none of us ever do. Now the disinformation attacks on democracies by Russia, by China and Iran, such as we saw in the latest Moldova election or the Georgia election that's taking place, the sources of such disinformation have become endemic to US politics. With increasingly less interest in what's true versus what's useful in terms of a power play, the basis for those common platforms that previously made up the free world, it's already crumbled. So yes, we're now seeing a period of change. The change will be messy, the change will be noisy, and while Donald Trump may accelerate it, he may take some of the attention if he's part of it, it's not actually going to be much about him at all. So let's keep our heads, while all about are losing theirs, take a keen interest in the dynamics of how this is going to play out over the months and the years to come.